time for Her Story in Higher Education. I'm your host, Dr. Johnell Goins. Let's make her story.
Hi, and welcome back, everyone. Thank you for tuning in once again to Her Story in Higher Education. Today on our show, we have Dr. Shea Kidd Houze, also affectionately known by her constituency as Dean Shea. Dean Shea, welcome to Her Story.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Everyone, Dean Shea serves as the Associate Vice President at the University of Tennessee, also called Rocky Top, and she's also the Dean of Students. Dean Shea, you are our highest administrator that we've had so far. I've spoken to professors, I've spoken to someone who has become an edupreneur, so they started out in administration, but they transitioned. But you are the uppermost administration that we've been fortunate to talk to. Tell us, what is it like being a dean? I know there's no typical day, but what are the expectations? How does it feel?
Yeah, well, and again, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm humbled by the opportunity. And it is truly, there's no same day, as you've alluded to. I think COVID-19 has thrown an even more interesting wrench into the role. And yeah, so you mentioned that I'm known as Dean Shea, and I think that says a lot about how I take on this role of Dean of Students. My students are really important to me, so on any given day, I want to make sure I have time to meet and connect with students. Before COVID, that often meant I was the most visible administrator on campus. So I might be in our student union or in some of the notable parts of campus, spending time with students or meeting with students if they had concerns, grievances, celebrations even. I just got off the Zoom with a student who just wanted to connect. She ran into me in the hallway, and we talked for 45 minutes just a little while ago. So students have to be number one, and I think that that's critical to my role, because if I've lost touch on what students need, it's kind of a moot position in my opinion. I'm also I serve as Associate Vice Chancellor, so I'm the second person in the organizational structure in our division. So I provide a lot of support to the Vice Chancellor, who reports to the Chancellor. So that means that we troubleshoot quite a bit. So if there's something going on campus, we're thinking about it, or if I foresee something coming, I'm like, hey, I'm hearing this from students, or I'm really that mouthpiece to amplify what's going on with students, and I take that really seriously. And so I'm also someone who's not afraid to be the dissenter. So I might be someone who has a different opinion, and I'm going to elevate that to the Vice Chancellor just so he has that lens. And then within our organizational structure, the Division of Student Life has 19 units at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I have oversight of 8 of those. So a lot of that is supervision. So working alongside my team, 2 associate deans, 7 department heads, plus the department within the Office of the Dean of Students makes the 8. And so supervision is a big part. And then, just spending time moving initiatives forward. So we have a lot of things going on around mental health or diversity, equity, inclusion, making sure students are engaged. And we start those conversations, but my role is really to keep those things moving, keep that momentum going. And then finally, I affectionately say, clean up on aisle 4. So sometimes it's like, someone dropped a ball somewhere, or someone delivered the wrong information. And so a lot of times I'll go back and call that person or email that person, the parent, the family member, the student. So I'm that liaison. I really connect a lot of dots that, if something got miscommunicated, I serve in that role as well. And that's a little bit of a nutshell of what we do. And one thing I left out is crisis. So I'm a different Dean of Students in that I don't have oversight of student conduct, but I do am typically the point person around crises, whether that's a micro crisis, meaning with a student, or a macro, meaning like something happening on the university. I'm a kind of a first call that people
You have a large purview for responsibility. responsibilities. I mean, my hat is off.
Thank
You
you.
actually had time to do this today. I cannot imagine, what that looks like in an actual day, fitting all those pieces together. So that's
Thanks.
incredible.
We just take it one day at a time, one moment at a time, and we get the work done.
I believe it. I do. Well, I want to talk about a subject that a group of friends and mentors and we throw this around from time to time. The term the boys club.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for the viewers who are not familiar with that term, the boys club refers to the club for men. In higher education and in other sectors, there is an area or there's an expectation in administration for there to only be men from that area on up. So in higher administration, there's a different language. There can be different behaviors held by those men because they're the only people there. So Dean Shea, first, have you come in contact with that? Number one. And if you have, how do you navigate around that as a female?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think that certainly nationally, when I talk to friends and colleagues, that's something that exists. Also, just being really transparent as I look at the organizational structure on our campus,
Right.
we only have one woman who's a vice chancellor. And the difference is we have a woman who's a chancellor. Okay. So I think I've really been fortunate to have women in leadership who understand the value of gender equity and have set the tone. The chancellor, when I first arrived at Tennessee, was a woman. And so this is my second woman. And I think that makes a difference. Okay. And so I don't necessarily on a day-to-day basis feel that, and I've been fortunate to have supervisors who are not threatened by a woman who's competent and who is confident. Right. And so I've really been fortunate in that way. But I will add, if time allows, one thing that I think it's important for women is to really have a circle. You mentioned your friends. So I think regardless, we tend to still be in the minority, especially as we move up. So, I'm one of the highest ranking women on our campus and woman of color. And so it can feel lonely, period. And then when you add your identities, it can feel even more lonely. So I think it's really important to have a circle of women that you trust and that can be a sounding board for you because, and that can be in the field or outside the field, because I think you probably need both perspectives, but we all as women, I think, can identify with being in that place, in that space once upon a time. So being able to say, I'm challenged by XYZ. We also at Tennessee have an affinity group called the Commission for Women, and it's kind of a combination of both affinity but also policy-oriented groups. So there are women who are voting members and who are ex officio. My role is ex officio, so I'll always be on the group. And their sole purpose is advancing women. So I think that's the other piece. I was recently named a HERS Institute recipient, which is HERS is a national organization.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So my university is sending me to a HERS Institute for 9 days of intensive, and it is the sole purpose is to advance women in higher education. So I really feel like I'm in a good place that understands the value of women, not to discount, that feeling that exists in some places. I've just really been fortunate that, especially in the last almost 3 years, which is hard to believe I've been here this long, I've really had people who've supported me in my ambition to kind of keep growing within this profession.
That's really good. It's interesting that you mentioned being a female and an African American, that intersectionality. I know you've learned different things along the way because you're advancing despite what could be barriers in other areas of higher ed. So tell us, with that advancement, tell us what is one piece of leadership advice that you have learned in this journey, on this journey of yours?
Yeah, relationships are really important from a leadership perspective. So I think that's a lesson, is that it has to be rooted. Leadership has to be rooted in relationships, and leadership is not about being in charge of people or having power over people. It is really about working alongside people. So many people have picked up on my language when I say I work alongside 8 departments, because I don't have power over those people. Like, we get work done when we are working in lockstep with one another, or not in lockstep and we disagree, but that we have that relationship. So I think that that's critical. I also really identify with the social change model of leadership, and it really focuses on leadership as a process, not a position. So I think a lot of times traditional forms of leadership have been very much about title, position. You know, I had a hall director say, I've never heard anybody call you Dr. Kidd Houze or Dean Houze. And I'm like, no, because, you know, I'm here to do my job and to serve students and to serve my staff and to serve the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I think we can get confined in the power related to position, and then we don't get anything done because people don't trust us. So I really, really relate and identify to, and social change model really begins with individual, then group, then community, then society, and kind of works its way out. So it involves kind of this reflective process internally where people feel really confident in who they are as people first. They understand their values, what they bring to the table, what their shortcomings are, and then they work outward. So it's kind of this inner work before outer work kind of philosophy. And I just really resonate. I try to make sure that's incorporated into my leadership philosophy as often as possible.
You know, I've never said this to you, but I've always noticed that about you. I've always noticed that you have embraced the person first model. You know, when I first got my doctorate back in 2014, I was stuck on that title because it was new. It was like a new car, you know. And, but learning and meeting you and watching you when you were at the University of Southern Mississippi, operate as Shea, you know, and now you're operating as Dean Shea. You know, I admire that because I can tell that those relationships are budding, and I can tell that your operation is stronger because you do embrace that model. You do embrace who you are as a person and then grow from outside. So yeah, I've always noticed that about you.
Well, thank you. And we try. I mean, I just think that our work is, again, as I often say, hard work and heart work. So if we're not connected to all the pieces of people, especially in this COVID environment, especially in an environment where racism seems more overt in a lot of ways, even though we've made systemic changes over time. So it becomes really critical because I talked to my associate dean a little while ago, and we're talking about things outside of work because I need to know that too, you know, because we're whole people. We don't just like hang up something when we leave, you know, when we leave home. We don't leave that at home. We bring that all with us.
That's really good. That's really good. Well, tell me, on your journey, when you first started, you know, we're talking about you as a person, when you first started at the University of Southern Mississippi, majoring in speech communication, did you ever imagine that you would be here as Associate Vice Chancellor of UT Knox?
No, not in East Tennessee. Let's just say that. Rocky Top was never on the map, never had that on my radar at all. You know, in grad school, I went to the University of Georgia, as you probably know, and so we had a cohort, so it was 20 of us, and we had these awards that we gave each other at graduation, just ragging on each other, and mine was most likely to be the first dean of students in our class, and I fulfilled that. So I think there were some there were, you know, in my brain I was like, I love Dr. Joe Paul, who, as you know, was vice president at Southern Miss for a long time and a mentor, and so I just saw that in my future at some point, but I really never saw myself as a dean of students. And yeah, this position just came at a time where I felt like the AVP step was next, and I stepped out. It was a pretty big leap from being a director with 14 people to being an assistant at the time, assistant vice chancellor, with a staff of 8 units. So it was a big leap. I will say I've always been goal oriented, and felt like being a chief student affairs officer was a goal at some point. But to see the backdrop of the Smoky Mountains every day when I drive to work, no, that was not forecasted.
Yeah. How did you know? How did you know that it was time to do that? I know you said that you felt like that was the next step. How did you know that, it was time to leave everything and everybody that you knew? How did you know that?
And that's it's a really good question. All of your questions have been good. I think what the viewers may not know is the University of Southern Mississippi is also home for me, and it was a safety net for me when my life transitioned and I had a very young son, and got some really good support from my family at a time when I needed it. And so people sort of thought I'd be there forever. Like, you're coming back home after being away. I'd moved to Hattiesburg from Memphis. And it was more about, I had this amazing opportunity, both in working in alumni and development there, and then transitioning over and working in student retention. And we had done some really audacious things in that department. And I honestly was not looking hard, I'll say. Okay. I was really happy in my role. But there were some moments where I felt like I was ready to transition to more shaping and working alongside staff. Okay. Students will always be central. I think we all get to a point, a progression in our lives where, the programming part of the day-to-day is still exciting and invigorating, but there's people in line waiting to also have those opportunities. Right. And so it just, I don't know, I'm a gut kind of person. So it just felt, like it potentially might be time. And I read the book, NASPA published the AVP book around that time. Uh-huh. And so I started reading that, and I think I just sort of got the bug, and I just did a very, very, very high level view. And in my brain in Hattiesburg, I'd never wanted to be more than about 3 hours radius. And Rocky Top is 7.5, and a different time zone. Everybody I love is in Central Time. Oh my goodness! And really, I connected to a mentor, and I just said, "Hey, this job reads like all of the things I've gotten to experience rolled into one, and with some room to grow, because we're never ready for the next role, and we grow into it." Right. And she was kind of like, why not? Why wouldn't you apply? And so, I got that validation, connecting back to the question about women. Yeah. I got that validation from a woman who had been a vice president at a very large university for a long time. And I think that was important, because I still, to this day, have insecurities and might not have thought I was ready, or might not have thought it was time. And truthfully, I wasn't. We never are until we take the leap. And so really that exercise, I call it an exercise often, because it was also about a process of rediscovering my values, which we do in a cover letter, and people don't often think of that, but I think it's a very important part of the process. So laying out, who am I as a professional, and what is my leadership philosophy? And those weren't the prompts, but that's how I chose to lay out the letter. Uh-huh. That whole process was really about who is Shea and who is she becoming, and not about if I got the job or not. Now the ending of the story was great, but I didn't go into it saying that the University of Tennessee was going to determine if I was worthy or not. that just wasn't how I entered that process. And I think that's why it worked out, because I, put myself out there. I interviewed knowing I could return to a job that I loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I connected with people, and it just, at every stage of it, it felt right. And there was peace of mind about it. And so it was really the process that kind of solidified that it was also the right time.
Yeah.
And so I interviewed actually 3 years ago on Sunday, because it was also my son's birthday. And 5 days later, I got a call offering me the job. So it all worked out, and felt like, in step by step by step, that it was where I was supposed to be.
Well, happy work anniversary to you, and happy birthday. Yeah, my goodness. Yeah, I love that story. I do. I love that story. I love the process that you described. It makes perfect sense to know that next step.
Mm-hmm.
I made the move from Hattiesburg, not to 7 hours away, more like 5.5.
Right.
But it does take some actualization of who you are and where you want to go, and yeah, that is a big step. So thank you for elaborating on your process.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one more question.
People don't hear about,
Yeah. I always imagine that a search is more of a self-fulfillment thing. Like, I'm not fulfilled here anymore, and I want to go and I want to find out where I need to be next. What's my next step? And that was not it at all. So it's good to hear a different side of how things can be.
Absolutely.
But, Dean Shea, I have one more question.
Okay.
On this webcast, on Her Story, I ask every guest this question. I ask, well, first let me review the objective of Her Story. Our objective is to inspire women. I want to inspire women who are coming up through the ranks. I want to inspire women who are already in their position, women who are retired, who are looking for that next step. What trajectory are they going on? So I ask you to look back and to tell me if there was one piece of advice that you could tell a young lady coming up. What would it be?
Ooh, well, I probably have several pieces. Okay. I think, first of all, learning who you are is really important. And what I mean by that is really exploring your story, thinking about who you are, what you contribute, what are your opportunities, what are the things that aren't strengths at all. I think, and being okay with all of that, not trying to make up for your strengths, but just really having a good sense of who you are. And the other thing is inviting diverse perspectives into your circle. I think as humans, we're all guilty of being attracted by people who are like us. And I think that is helpful from a standpoint of affirmation, and that's very important, but also pulling in those people who are going to be like, well, have you thought about this way? Or what do you think about this? Or, those people who can play that devil's advocate role, which leads me to my next point, which is, I think, identifying a personal board of directors. So, every major company, corporation, university, entity has a board of trustees, a board of directors. So why don't we do that as people? So I think it's really helpful to have, 4 or 5 people who are trusted advisors who, bring something different to the table. So mine are, someone who's retired, someone who's about 10 years older than me, someone who's the same age, and 2 people who are younger. And that youngest person is also like a mentor. So I'm providing advice to them, but they're also providing advice to me. And I call on them for different reasons. My mom's an ex officio. She doesn't really get a vote, but she's the one who's going to be really, really honest with me. So that's really important to me. And I didn't necessarily know that when I was younger. I also think, I mentioned this earlier, but building relationships, so that connects back to that personal board of directors. As women, we say no a lot, or we put off our hopes sometimes for families or partners or, life situations. And so I think we often have to balance that. I certainly have had to balance that in my career. We also balance fear of just not being ready. So I think saying yes, even if you're afraid. So I mentioned the leap, from being a director to being in my current role. And if I had not applied, I never would have gotten here. So we've got to apply, and then we've got to go through the process, even if it's uncomfortable, even if that period of transition when you don't know anything is uncomfortable. We have to say yes when we're afraid, because I think there are definitely systems that limit us, and I want to be very clear about that. And I think we have personal things within us that also limit, our potential. And I think the last thing, I told you I had a lot of things, but the last thing that comes to mind is abandoning our 5, 10, 15-year plans. I think we all are like, in 5 years, I want to do this. And in 10 years, I want to do this. And,
Yeah.
and instead, we're always looking to the future, and we're not looking to today and thinking about that. And if we can do that and do good work where we are, I guarantee you the rest will follow. So when we're really concerned about what's next as opposed to what's right now, then we're missing right now. So that's another piece that I was that student in grad school. It's like, in 5 years I'm gonna have a doctorate, and then and then like I did achieve some things, but I think I missed some life and some enjoyment and some fulfillment. And so I'm really enjoying, I'm not thinking about when I'm going to be a vice chancellor. I'm just really enjoying doing my job well here and now. And I think maybe I'll stay in this role and maybe I won't, but I'm not really putting that on a timeline at the moment.
I enjoyed all of those. I know you said you had a lot, but they were valuable pieces.
Well, good.
I never thought about having my own board of directors. I know for my program, I have an advisory board for the Valley in college, but I never thought about doing that for Johnell. That's so interesting. Yeah, and I have exactly who I want to appoint. So yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So, ladies, I say on every show, remember your power. And Dean Shea has given us a lot to empower us by. Here's to ladies everywhere. May we empower them, may we inspire them, and may we be them. I'm Dr. Johnell Goins, and this is Her Story in Higher Education. Until next time, thanks for stopping by. Take care.